really, it was the worst part of the Depression, because later there were government programs like WPA. You've probably heard of that.
Oh, yeah.
And well, people were getting hungry.
Including you?
Well,
Back then, everybody was.
I remember coming home for lunch one day from school. Small towns, you walk home for lunch at noon from school. And I came home one day, I remember. We had oatmeal, didn't have any milk. We had what we called government butter and government sugar. It was commodities that was given to people that were hungry from federal government. That's what kept people alive. And I remember that butter and the sugar mixed in the oatmeal, and that was lunch.
How old were you then, Bob?
Oh, I suppose 10, 11.
Yeah, right. And you were the older of two brothers?
Oh, there was 2 boys and 2 girls.
And then where do you fall in?
I'm the oldest.
Are you? And then your brother also served in the 134th, right?
Yeah, well, I had 2 brothers. The one next to me, next youngest to me, died in 1976, but he was in the 134th, but he didn't go overseas with us because he was in an automobile accident in California and split his head open a little bit and wound up where they gave him medical discharge just before we went overseas.
When did you join the 134th and what caused you to consider the National Guard?
Well, I joined Company L, 134th, July 22nd, 1937. And my original intent or reason for joining was I heard that I could make $30 by going to summer camp with them. And 15 days time. And that was a lot of money in those days. 1937, $30 bought me clothes to go to finish high school my senior year. And I had money enough left over to, I don't know what, can't even remember whether I had a girlfriend then or not. I was going to say take the girlfriend to the movie, but I don't think I even had a girlfriend then.
Where was the 134th at that point? Where did you join?
Oh, I just passed there the other day. Do you know where the old police station is? 11th and Dodge. Southeast corner, 11th and Dodge. The block west of there, on the northwest corner of 12th and Dodge, is an old fire barn. And I noticed that it's an antique store now, but that was the armory. And that served as an armory for Company L, Company K, Regimental Headquarters Company, Headquarters Detachment, 2nd Battalion, Medical Detachment, 134. Of course, we drilled on different nights. But each unit had to have a orderly room and a supply room separate. And of course we could use a common drill floor because being drilling on different nights wasn't a problem. But that was, well, late July, and I'd say by the 10th of August, something like that, the Nebraska National Guard was shipped by train to Fort Riley, Kansas area. They called it Camp Funston. They're still at Camp Funston, just adjacent to Fort Riley. And it was also a training camp in World War I, as well as World War II. But they used it for National Guard encampment, which all it was an open field. And we pitched 5-man programmable tents and set up the regimental areas that way. But that was they called it 4th Army Maneuvers, because they brought in several divisions from different parts of the country in addition to some regular Army units, and they actually had a little mock war between, they chose up sides, red and blues, and they had a little bit of a maneuver. And of course it was my first experience in the military, plus in the field playing soldier. And one of the other kicks was, I think I weighed about 135 pounds then. It's always been a joke that the Browning automatic rifle weighs about twice as much as a regular rifle. In those days, our regular rifle was a 1903 Springfield. But the BAR, which was the World War I weapon, also, it was a good one, but it was about twice as heavy. Of course, the rookie, the smallest guy in the squad, always got saddled with that BAR. That's Browning automatic rifle. But that went on forever. Anyway, naturally being a raw recruit and the smallest in the squad, I carried that sucker. It seemed like all over the state of Kansas. But it was fun. I was in good shape. Even though I was small, I was good shape, young, dumb. But anyhow, it was fun. And I made my $15 and learned how to drink 3-2 beer with the big boys. That's all that they would sell on a military post, 3.2. And of course, kids like me, that was a big experience. That was my first experience. I didn't even like beer, but I drank it because I wanted to be like the rest of the guys. But anyhow, it was a hot, dry area, 100 degrees in the shade and no shade. There was one tree in the whole regimental area. It was strictly a Kansas plain, really. One lone tree. It wasn't in Company L's area either. But anyway, I learned a little bit of what the military is about. In fact, that's when I found out a little bit of what the Guard was about. Traditionally, in those days, around 5 o'clock in the evening, or maybe 5:30, when we were doing routine training in or near the encampment and not on maneuvers, they would have a ceremony called retreat. And usually it was 5:15, 5:30 in the evening. That prevailed also in World War II all the way through. But what it involves is all the units form up in their what we call parade uniform, and mainly it was to ceremony to lower the flag. Anyway, retreat parade way. We were taught to present arms was the command, which you brought the weapon up. In fact, there's a picture in the paper here just recently of an old picture of some kids doing this, some Boy Scouts. But anyhow, you came to present arms with a rifle while you brought your piece up like this in here. The bayonet stud on the rifle was supposed to be even with the eyeballs. And that command was given as if there is a band available, they play the national anthem during the lowering of the flag. If that's not available, the bugler over a megaphone or microphone system nowadays, but back in those days, well, they used a big megaphone. And this is for the whole regimental area. Might be maybe a square mile. That they would play to the colors, bugle call, which was substitute for the national anthem. And I remember the first time, especially when I stood retreat and there was a band playing the national anthem, I got kind of a tingling up my spine, and I experienced the emotion, I guess, of patriotism. I'd read about it. I knew that it was, but it was then that I realized just what it was, and never have forgotten that. And of course, that nowadays that ceremony is, I think, unusual. The routines nowadays and the schedules and the different equipment and just the general hustle and bustle, I guess. I don't know whether they stand retreat in that manner. And another thing too was during that ceremony on an army post, everything stopped. If you were driving down the street in the car, if you were military, you dang well stopped your car, got out, faced the music or the flag, and rendered a hand salute during that time, which was proper if you were not armed, or if you were armed with a pistol, of course, but you rendered a hand salute. But with a rifle, of course, you didn't present arms. But everything stopped during that brief period in time, every day. And that was a real learning experience there. And like I say, I always remembered it. I guess that's what starts making a guy a soldier. I don't know whether there's much consideration anymore. But it was important to us back in those days. And of course, after experienced summer camp away, then you come back home. You as a veteran, all these other young punks joining, why, then they were rookies. But we had drill 2 hours once a week, $1 drill for a buck private. In the summertime, at that summer camp, the government paid $1 drill or $1 a day to a buck private. $1.15, I think, to TFC, $1.25 for corporal, and I don't know. Corporal was my rank in the guards before we were mobilized. Finally made corporal, and that was after, well, that was going on 4 years. I had one complete 3-year enlistment before I made corporal. But rank was tough to come by in those days. There weren't many. Squad leader was a corporal. By the end of World War II, squad leader in the infantry was, I think, 5 stripes. So they upgraded it thanks to Ernie Pyle. Ernie Pyle was really the kind of the infantryman's buddy, and his stories so influenced War Department that he was a big reason for the combat infantry badge, which included a $10 a month hazardous duty pay. I got a kick out of that one too. They paid the infantry $10 a day or a month extra for hazardous duty. They paid some other branches, I believe, submarine duty and flight pay. I could stand corrected on this. I believe they had half their basic pay in addition as hazardous duty pay. You read the statistics where the casualties were in World War II, and the infantry, I think, accounted for about 75% of casualties. But it was still only $10 a month is all it was worth to us. Anyway, that's just one of the little quirks of fate. But we wouldn't have had that if it hadn't been for Ernie Pyle. Because Ernie, I think he got assigned to Europe. He wound up down in Italy, and he lived with the infantry. When they were fighting in the mountains down there, there was a lot of static warfare there. And anyway, he lived right up with the infantry, which was unusual for news people. But he was down in the company areas, not at regimental area. He was down in the companies where the grunts were. And he earned the respect of the infantry. And I think all the infantry people had a special place in their heart for him for no other reason than $10 a month. But that combat infantry badge got to be, we were accused of even wearing it on our underwear. But especially right after World War II, or after VE Day, when they really got around to issue the doggone things. All the infantry people were proud of it. Because about everybody that wore one of those also wore at least one Purple Heart. In fact, there's very few people in the infantry that didn't get wounded at least once, if they were in the rifle company. And the weapons company, they had some pretty heavy casualties too, not quite as bad as the rifle company.
Which one's the combat infantry?
That's the top, the blue thing with the wreath.
What were the qualifications for the combat infantryman's badge?
The combat infantry badge is contact with the enemy for 24 hours in an infantry unit, regiment and below, as far as the level. If you weren't in an infantry regiment, why, you weren't entitled to it. Anybody in the infantry regiment, if that regiment was engaged with the enemy for 24 hours, was basically it. However, it was passed on to several people. Well, I had two people in my platoon that were wounded. Their first contact with the enemy. So, in contact with the enemy, if you were being technical about that, why, their contact was getting wounded, one of them was wounded and one of them was killed. Either way, you got combat infantry badge. Also, either way, you got a Purple Heart.
Tell me, once you were involved as a combat infantryman, how did you cease to become a combat infantryman? How did you get out of combat?
How did you get out of combat?
What were the ways, the legitimate ways to get out of combat, further combat?
Get wounded or killed. Some people did have, I think there were some legitimate cases of battle fatigue. Some people just couldn't take the strain, and they just lost. It was a small percentage, but it happened. I saw it happen one day. A young fellow, he thought everybody was his enemy. He wound up, he went berserk. He had a cartridge belt he was swinging. Anybody came close, well, he was just swinging around. He thought everybody was going to get him. And it's legitimate. Had another good friend that had a 500-pound bomb, one of our own bombs, landed within just a few feet of him, shook him up pretty bad. He lost it. He lost all control. Became a raving idiot. They got him calmed down. I see him nowadays, and he's all right, but he just couldn't handle that strain after that bomb hit. And of course, that could happen to a lot of people. 500-pound bomb makes a lot of noise. But some people are a little more high-strung than others, and if circumstances are just right enough, there's always going to be maybe 1 in 100 top. We had one officer in our company that first time that artillery round even came close to him, he went clear out of it. That was the second day in combat. But you never know, it doesn't make any difference what rank you are. And you don't know what's going to happen to you. You always wonder, is it going to be me? That was one of our worst fears, is fear itself, showing fear. Showing yellow to your buddies. That was absolutely the worst fear we had. We just didn't want to. You're scared all the time, but you try to keep a stiff upper lip. But I always felt that I always felt sorry for two people. Buck Private that private always felt sorry for him because everybody was telling him what to do. And he had all that time to worry about staying alive. If you were an NCO or an officer, well, you had responsibilities that could give you something to think about besides yourself. And company commander in the infantry was, well, one of the basic rules as a company commander, you're responsible, or not only company commander of any unit, is responsible for what his troops does or what they do or do not do. And that covers a lot of territory. If you, company commander, well, we had company commander, one of the best in the regiment. That, well, after July the 17th, it was the morning that 2nd Platoon, my platoon, wound up getting clobbered. Later on that day, he asked the battalion commander to relieve him of command of the company. He felt that it was his fault. It wasn't anything he could have done, but he sincerely felt that somewhere he had failed and he didn't feel worthy of commanding that company. The old man changed his mind, but that was, I got that from good source too. The person told me that was present when it happened, and he was also an officer. It emphasized to me the responsibilities that a company commander has. Later on, my own experience as a company commander, of course, I'm not in combat. Even in peacetime garrison duty, company commander is responsible for what his unit does or does not do. That still covered a lot of ground. Also, in case when you're in National Guard, well, you're financially responsible for the equipment that's in the unit. So you dang well need some good NCOs and junior officers to help you.
Did you know anything at all about guns or weapons before you joined the National Guard?
Oh, I love to shoot. And my buddy and I his dad took us pheasant hunting a lot. Also, my friend his grandfather lived out here by Valley, had a little shack out along the Elkhorn River, and we used to go out there in the wintertime, sometimes on the weekends, go out there hunting rabbits and squirrels. And we learned to shoot a little bit there. We love to shoot. And so, and I think most all kids in those days, there were more opportunities. And you didn't have to go far out of town to be far enough out to shoot most anything you wanted to shoot, as far as a rifle or a shotgun. And there were just more opportunities for young people to do that. Of course, in those days, I think parents also were very careful to give us instruction as far as safety is concerned. I remember we later on took our younger brothers hunting with us. We watched over them like a hawk until we were sure that they knew enough to handle a weapon safely. But by the time I got in the Guards, I was pretty well acquainted with firearms, and I had I really enjoyed shooting. It was a lot of fun, whether it's military or whatever. Still do.
Tell me a little bit about Company L and its nickname. And
Oh, Foreign Legion. Well, Company L did get that nickname, the Foreign Legion, because we had diversified nationalities in the company. And I think I mentioned to you once before, we had a company commander. I think he was Irish. Kelso was his name. But it was near St. Patrick's Day, and I remember him standing up in front of the company saying he had a whole company of Irishmen. Well, we had probably 30% of our outfit was Italian, so he called them the Black Irish. Then we had another 30% that was probably Bohemian and Polish, and most of the guys in those days, well, they lived in South Omaha, so he called those guys South Omaha Irish, and the rest of them were halfway Irish somehow, maybe by birth. But he called it a whole company of Irishmen. Basically what he was referring to was the nickname Foreign Legion, because we did have probably a greater variety of different nationalities in L Company than any of the other units. There was 20 companies in the regiment, and all the other companies knew Company L by that nickname, Foreign Legion. Whenever we went to summer camp, if you were in L Company, went, oh, you're in the Foreign Legion, eh? Yeah, that's us. But we were proud of it, and we had a good camaraderie as a result. There wasn't any, prejudice of any kind. We'd cuss each other, call each other names, but it was all, just fun. And didn't matter what. If we did rouse people, though, but that's just part of being an outfit. And it made a good company. We had a lot of fun.
Did you know of any of the members of Company L before you joined the National Guard?
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell me about how long you knew them and how?
Well, some of them went to high school with. And some of them were from my neighborhood. At that time, I lived around Mason School. And we had quite a few guys in the guards that lived in that area. And then at Tech, one of my close friends, Bob Whited, he and I were in the same class, graduating class out of Tech. And of course, he got in about 1938, I think. He stayed in really longer than I did. Of course, they kicked officers out quicker than they did enlistment. I mean, once your time and grade was up by a little different system. An officer, let's see, if you had 7 years in the same rank, and if you were not qualified for promotion, if you had 20 years service in, you were automatically retired. They would retain you until you completed your 20 years. And many times they might sometimes they would reduce a man down to a sergeant and let him stay in for his 20 in order to get retirement at 20 years. But, well, you take enlisted men like Whitey. He was a master sergeant, seemed like forever, in the Guards after the war. Well, he was a tech sergeant when he got out, after the war was over. But when he got back in the Guards, he wound up as a first sergeant, which is a master. And the Army likes to retain those people as long as possible because of their experience and training. And officers, why they like to get fresh second lieutenants in and get rid of the old officers. And so officers are retired quicker than enlisted men, it seemed like.
Did you know any of the families of the members?
Oh, yeah. Well, I got my best buddy in, and of course his family was almost like relatives. He and I started hanging out together when 1934, and we still visit each other at every opportunity. He lives out in western Nebraska now, but we're still close friends. In fact, we stood up for each other when we got married, named kids after each other, all that stuff.
Tell me about 1940.
Well, let's see. Late 39 and 40 was, well, right there. Started with that day right there. That's published by the World Herald. It's a copy of the World Herald on the day that Germany invaded Poland, which for all intents and purposes was the day that World War II began. Because France and England had given Hitler an ultimatum. Any more aggression and we will declare war. So Hitler thumbed his nose at Chamberlain and invaded Poland, and it was automatic. England and France declared war on Germany. And then Hitler proceeded to show them what war was about and overran France and chased the English back across the Channel. That during this time, we were all I'm talking about people in this country, we're all beginning to see the handwriting on the wall. And in late 39, they increased the number of drills that we had. As an example, between Christmas and New Year's in 39, we were assembled, took us down to Fort Crook for an extra week's training. They did this because they had so many students in the outfits. Why that was a week they was off school, so that was the reason they did it at that time. It just happened that, of course, Fort Crook was still an infantry post. And many of the barracks were empty anyhow, because the old peacetime army had been whittled down like Clinton was doing to the present day army, only it was whittled down much more drastic. And of course, didn't have the money to support a standing army either during the Depression. But when they started counting it up, well, they had as many National Guard people as they did regular Army anyhow. And of course the reserves, they were affected, but I don't believe the Army Reserve was very active or very strong at that time. There were not many people in it. And we went down to Fort Crook. Turned out that week was a foot of snow, and well, I still tell a story about walking post down there behind those old barracks. It was 13 below zero and 12 inches of snow on the ground. And they did not issue overshoes, nor did they issue gloves. If you didn't have your own gloves, you're cold. But anyway, we spent all our time indoors, and well, we had quite a bit of instruction, but it was all classroom stuff. We could have done that back in the Army. But anyway, it was one of those activities that convinced us that something was up. And then, of course, in 1940, in August of 40, we went to summer camp. We went to camp for 3 weeks instead of 2 weeks that year. And the state of Nebraska still owes us their add-on dollar. I think I started to tell you a while ago how they paid. Uncle Sam, federal, paid, like I mentioned, $1 for a buck private. At summer camp, the state of Nebraska added $1 to everybody's pay, regardless of rank. It was $1 a person. So a buck private, his pay was doubled. But the state of Nebraska had only appropriated enough money to pay for 2 weeks. They never did pay for that third week. But anyway, it was, of course, that summer camp in 1940 was, at that time, the draft law was, well, this was in late August, and the draft law was enacted officially September 16th. So everybody knew about the draft law being voted on by Congress and all that. Or it was being argued at that time, but everybody knew dang well that they was going to have a draft. And the draft was to be for 1 year of military training, anybody between 18 and 35 years old, any able-bodied man, single. And the trouble was they didn't draft very many people to start with because they didn't have any place to put them. They had to start building training camps. They had the ground, but they had to build barracks, and so they built Camp Robinson, which was a training area in World War I, down by Little Rock, and that's where we were scheduled to go, and they had it ready for us by the end of the year. So we were mobilized on December 23rd because that was a historic date for another mobilization, I think, for the Philippine insurrection or something. So anyhow, we were mobilized on that date, and we were billeted in the old Clarkson Hospital, which was vacant at the time. It was down at 22nd and Howard. It's where the energy, I can't think of the name of the business that's in there, but it's, I think, part of OPPD maybe. It's right by the YMCA down there. Well, the old hospital was right there at that point, at that time. So that's where we were billeted. And one of the funniest things is, by this time we thought we were real soldiers. course, we used to, some of us thought was good at manual arms and the fancy stuff. We were starting to learn fancy stuff. And one of them was with an 03 bolt operator. We had a deal, you popped your rifle, brought it up to inspection arms. Then you flipped it over with the bolt open, holding onto the knob, you spun your rifle with that. And then as you brought it back into the port position, then you shoved the bolt on and down. Well, on the 03 rifle, there was a little lever back there that you could put one position that was locked down, another position that was used for fire, and another position was used to take it out and clean. And so we used to sneak up on a guy that was going to be doing this fancy manual arms, and we'd put it on cleaning position. So when he swung this around with this bolt rifle, so we did this to one guy, and he was up on top of the stairs in that hospital building. The rifle went down the stairs was halfway up here to a landing, and then halfway up this way. And there's windows right here on this level. That rifle went down those stairs and out through that window and then 2 stories down to the ground. There was a little bit of static on that one because that was government property that was being abused a little bit. But little things like that happen. But anyhow, we were shipped to Little Rock. I think the unit arrived in Little Rock January 6th, 41. I wound up staying in Omaha. The day before they left, I wound up with the flu and a boil on the back of my neck. And so they put me in a hospital down at Fort Crook, and the outfit shipped out. So then, after 3 or 4 days in the hospital, while they had me all cured, they sent me over to, I think it was 17th Infantry, was still stationed at Fort Crook. They attached me there for quarters and rations to wait for my orders from Little Rock, my shipping orders, which had to be instigated by my unit down in Little Rock and mailed up here. And so I must have had 2 weeks waiting for that. So I found out from the company clerk, the unit that I was attached to, he says if your orders don't come in by 10 o'clock, they won't be in any later than that. And I was kind of my own boss anyhow, so I'd come up home. I was on pay status, so I had a pretty good deal. I could come home. Of course, I had to be back down there by midnight. Well, I really had to be there the next morning for reveille, because I was accountable there. I had to be there at that time so that they could count my nose. But otherwise, well, that's all the time that I had to be there. So it took a good 2 weeks before those orders ever came through. I had them made here. And all at that time, the guys down in Camp Robertson, they had moved in, and they had these wooden frames that they put these 5-man tents over. And they had a wooden floor and an oil stove in each one of them. But they had to build sidewalks, and otherwise it was mud. And they built rock walks and did all that kind of stuff. I got out of that. the time I got down there, the blocks was all built and I was settled in. So, worked out pretty good for me. And another month, and of course, I was corporal when we were mobilized. Another month, and the units were 96 men per company, what they call peacetime maintenance strength. And they were allowed to, the War Department allowed them to go to full wartime strength of 217 men to company. And then all of the draftees from Nebraska were processed through Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and shipped down there and filled the regiment up to that 217 men per company. So we still had a 100% Nebraska regiment. And 3,500, over 3,500 men then. So that was the beginning of a good outfit, really. Once we got accustomed to Army life full time, we had to train all of those. That was an experience, and that was a real education to me. Here I was, 19 years old, shaved about once a week whether I needed to or not, and I found out later that recruits had a nickname for me as Cupid, because I was a baby-faced kid. And of course I didn't hear him say it, but I found out later that there was two of us that were picked, two sergeants, and we were picked to be instructors in the, for all these replacements. We had to give them their basic. And we had to get the books out at night and study like hell for our classes the next day, because that's where the information came from. We didn't know it. We had to learn it ourselves too. But it was a real learning experience that way. And you had to do it, that's all. If you wanted to keep some stripes, you had to perform. And it worked out. But, in fact, I got to thinking I was pretty damn good sergeant. I don't know whether anybody else thought so, but I did anyhow. In fact, that's when I started smoking cigars. I thought that cigars made me look older, so 50 years. But,
Tell me about the conditions down there.
it was a good camp. In fact, I got a picture of it around here someplace. Aerial photo. I think you've probably seen it.
Is it humid? Humid?
Yeah, the winter was mild. For us, that coming from here, why, it was a mild winter. They had a little bit of snow, not much. Never stayed on the ground very long, if it did. And, it was hot some days, but he was, when you're that age, doesn't bother you a whole lot. We went through the basic training, basic individual, and then basic advanced individual, and then basic unit training, advanced unit training, and then maneuver stage. That's the sequence of the different parts of the training program. By the time you get through the maneuver stage, why, you have spent the bigger part of a year, which is what we had finished that by the time Pearl Harbor came around. But by that time, we were one hell of a good unit. I think we were outstanding. We went to Louisiana on maneuvers, and fought the snakes and by the time we completed that, why, we were as well trained, I think, the unit could be at that time. The bad part was the shortage of equipment, and especially units training in the States, because those people that were overseas got priority on everything. In fact, we were issued M1s not so long after we got to Robinson. We were issued M1s. We turned in our Springfields. And about 3 or 4 months later, well, they took the M1s away from us and sent them to people that needed them a lot worse than we did, and reissued that English Enfield rifle. Well, now it looks a lot like the old 03 World War I Army rifle. But the big difference was in that bolt. And we had trained in firing, especially rapid fire, where you had a certain amount of time to fire so many rounds. And so your bolt action got to be a automatic thing. And, the 03, you would lift, after you fired a round, you would lift the bolt, the knob, and that motion cocked the piece. And so then you slid it back, ejected the old round, forward, picked up the new round, put it in the chamber, and then you put the bolt back down, it locked it, and you was ready to fire. Well, the cocking the piece by lifting that bolt that way, that's where the resistance was. When you grabbed it, well, you had to give a little bit of a twist and use not a whole lot of strength, but you had to exert a little bit of pressure to do it. So in training with that and firing it, getting used to it, well, it became an automatic thing. We wind up with these Enfields, and they're just the opposite. You can lift that real quick because it doesn't cock when it's coming up, back, eject, pick up the new one, and then it cocks when you push that bolt down into place. Well, that's completely opposite to what you've been used to. And that was so doggone hard for us to get used to rapid fire on the firing range. That was a pain in the neck. We hated those things with passion.
Tell me about the cat-eye incident.
Oh, that was later. I was assigned as after all the basic training deal assignment was done, I came back to the company. I was assigned as the what they called a Commo Sergeant. The full title was Communications and Reconnaissance Sergeant. So we had to learn about the communication equipment that we were issued, which at that time consisted of an FCR 300 radio for the company commander and WWII telephone, field telephone. There wasn't a whole lot to it. Well, you had to learn a little bit about how to operate the radio, and a little bit of care and cleaning. But the reconnaissance was it was interesting, you know, as much as had to all people in my section had to learn map reading and get to an expert level, you might say. And I really enjoyed that. I liked it. I that cat-eye thing was your uncle. That wound up, we had a problem where we had to withdraw at night. And during the daytime, I was told where we had to go. And of course, the object was to move the unit out without making any noise, move back to from point A to point B, be there at a certain time, and do it without the enemy out here knowing what you're doing. That's what we were supposed to be learning how to do. But that process involved going through a swamp, down a cliff, across a creek, and some pretty heavy timber. But I was allowed to reconnoiter the route in the afternoon in the daylight, which I did. I had to use my compass, but I checked it out on the map, and I picked up my azimuth off the map of what I had to follow to get from A to B, worked all that out, followed it, got back to point B, and which was actually battalion headquarters. And I back there chewing a fat with somebody, and I looked down in a Jeep, and here's a roll of toilet paper. And so I stole that roll of toilet paper, and when I went back to my unit, I followed my route, and when I got into the timber, I wrapped toilet paper around the trees along that route, thinking, boy, I get here at night, boy, I can follow toilet paper. Well, of course, we had supper in the field. I don't know what time it got dark, but once it started getting dark, well, we saddled up and supposed to leave at a certain time, of course, and took off. Well, during this time, it started raining, just a light rain, but heavy clouds. Get into this heavy timber with all the foliage and everything, and it was just black. It was absolutely black. You could hold the toilet paper right up here like this. You couldn't see it. So my system didn't work very good. I had to take my compass, azimuth, I don't remember what it was, but say 55 degrees. And that's not the way to use a compass, really. It shows you can figure where 55 degrees is okay. But in order to use a compass accurately, you have to look across 55 degrees and pick a point out there on the horizon to walk to. Because you can walk over here 50 feet, you can still read 55 degrees, but you're 50 feet off the course. So it's a little bit inaccurate using that compass, just looking at it and saying that's 55 degrees. But anyhow, I wound up, I had to do something. Had 180 men behind me, holding on. We had straps on the back of our pack, and the guy behind you would hold on to your strap and on down the line. And I'm leading the company. And it wound up, I got to, let's see, in the process of getting from point A to point B, probably 2/3 of it was in this swamp area and the timber and all that. And the last third of it was just following a tree line, which you could see the open field over here. You knew where he was then, but down in that timber or something else. But getting to that point where the visibility was better was the accuracy that I had to achieve. And the heck of it was, I did better that night than I did when I went through in the daytime. But it was all was just a matter of luck. I just by accident, I actually came closer to where I wanted to be. So we made it. And Charlie, well, the next day we had to do a similar problem in the daylight. But his squad was my protection. I always had, when I had to lead like that way, from a tactical standpoint, there had to be a squad protecting me because I was, well, I was busy playing with my compass and reading a map, and I wasn't defending myself. I had to have somebody to look over me. So Charlie's squad was my protection that day, and that's when he was calling me Cat Eyes, because I got them through that swamp that night. And they all thought they was going to be lost and down there until daylight. But that was a little bit of luck. But I got a written commendation out of that for the time command.
Being better lucky than good.
Yeah.
You mentioned who your best buddy was. Who is that? Your best friend?
Oh, Leo Sampson.
Okay. And then, you don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but you talked about the guy who was next to the 500-pound bomb.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know who that was, or you don't have to tell me if you don't want?
I'd rather not.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. You don't happen to know who was in Charlie's squad, do you? Yeah. Let's see what else was going on.
Bob Whited. Well, it'd be, Bob Whited was his platoon sergeant.
Oh, that's right.
So Bob might have some memory. Oh. I don't know whether the Italians do this or not. We used to call each other Guinea all the time. They still do that? Back in those days, it's, oh, you Guinea son of a bitch. Or else you're Turk. I just wondered. I thought about that last night.
Every once in a while, call each other Ortega.
Yeah. No, it used to be Guinea. I don't know where the hell it ever came from.
Well, when were you shipped overseas?
The exact date's here, but it's around the 11th of May in 1944.
And how did you go overseas?
By boat, USS A.E. Anderson. And it was a regular troop ship. And we went over in convoy.
What were conditions like?
Well, it took 15 days in convoy, zigzagging and so forth. Quarters, crowded. 2 meals a day. Navy tradition, beans for breakfast once a week. I think I still got a scar on my shin. The different decks, each one of them was loaded with GIs. Our bed, if you will, was more like a stretcher. 5 of them in a tiered 5 high. And oh, gee whiz. Aisles about that wide. It was just a mass of humanity. It was like a bunch of maggots. But when they'd sound chow call, there was one ladder, gangway, I think the Navy called it, but whatever they called it. It was more like a ladder than a stair. And I remember one time the chow call sounded, well, I headed for that sucker. Run and jump. and my foot slid on the step that I aimed for, and the edge of the step above it, my shin ran into it. That smarted me. But I still went to shout. Oh, that hurt. Ooh, that hurt.
I think I'm going to jump ahead to one thing, and I'm going to take you over France, but tell me about that pit, what happened, what happened.
Oh, with Patton? That was the day that Patton and Eisenhower came to inspect, well, the 35th Division, and it went down to the 134th Infantry, and then wound up they were looking at Company L, which was doing a firing problem, live ammo, out on the beach where they could fire. The safety was toward the water. And the objective was that the squad leader would be given a mission, and then he had to issue his order to his members of his squad, tell them what to do. Team A, B, and C, such and such, and they were to advance to a certain point and fire in the process. And we had been trained to advance by what the term was infiltration, or better described as leapfrogging. Guys alternated running 20 yards and hitting the dirt, rolling over and coming into a firing position, firing. And Patton had his own theory, what he called marching fire. He says, best way to do it is just stand up there and fire offhand, take a few steps. Everybody fire. You get more lead going that way. He said, kicking up dirt in their face, they're not going to be aiming a shot at you. That's quote. And had a guy named Leffrig, IQ about 52 on his better days. And he was going by infiltration. Old Patton walks up behind him. Who taught you how to do that? Well, that's the way I've been trained, sir. Well, that isn't the way you should do it. And he went on and on. He says, you keep doing it that way, well, you're not going to be any good to us. We just will send you home. Guy said, boy, I'd sure like that, or something to that effect. That story's in here somewhere. I can't remember the exact words, but anyway, it was funny because, well, you know Patton's reputation. That couldn't have happened to a better general, or more apropos. That story spread around the regiment real quick.
How did you know when you were going to go overseas and go over to France?
No, we just almost knew that we were going to ETO. And there was always rumors about invasion of France being necessary in order to chase Hitler down. So that wasn't any big surprise, just a matter of when. We knew, well, after all of our training in 41, after Pearl Harbor, we shipped to the West Coast, and we did a lot of Coast Guard duty there because they thought the Japs were going to attack. And wound up, we finished a battalion out of the regiment for a mission up the Aleutian Islands, and there was 2 regiments pulled out of the division when they aligned the American divisions to the triangular concept as opposed to the old square. The old square had 4 regiments to a division, and the triangular, everything was in 3s, but they increased the firepower by adding tanks and artillery, and supposedly it was a more streamlined method. Actually, they were copying the Germans, because the German army had been real successful. So basically that's what they were doing. But anyhow, after spending a year and a half there, I remember Walter Winchell was a famous news commentator, radio. And he was talking about needing troops overseas. Here the 35th Division has been out here on the West Coast for over a year, and they're a fully trained, ready to go division. Here they are playing Boy Scout along the coast. Nicknamed them Hollywood Commandos. Of course, it wasn't long after that till we were back in Rucker. We went through the whole training deal again, except we didn't have to go through the individual basic. But losing so many people through transfers, we were filled in with people from the, what they call the IRTCs, Infantry Reserve Training Camps. So people came to us, they had completed their basic and some of their advanced individual. So we picked up from that point and retrained through the whole cycle again, and wound up doing our maneuver phase in Tennessee in the winter of 43-44. And then we shipped from Tennessee over to Camp Butler, North Carolina, where, by the way, our 35th reunion is going to be in Raleigh this year because of that. Or that's our nostalgia connection. But we trained a little bit in Butner, but mostly it was just a waiting period. They took us up to West Virginia and taught us how to climb mountains a little bit, and rappel down them, and how to live in the snow and all that stuff. And all it was just waiting to be shipped out. But it was April, last April we left for Camp Kimmer, New Jersey, and we shipped out on, I think it was 11th of May. And I remember the story about the sailors on the ship. They were telling us this outfit is different. He said that some of the other outfits, when they'd load them up for those guys coming on board, and of course as you come on board, you got your duffel bag and your weapon. And there's a guy there checking you on board. He'll call out your name, and you recite your serial number. And that's the way each man was counted. And these sailors were saying that, hell, 134th guys coming up with gangplank, laughing and joking, having a gay old time. He said some outfits, those guys are crying and really having a hell of a time making it up there. We had been stateside so damn long, we was almost getting a guilty conscience. About what it boiled down to. We was raring to go. Of course, if we'd have known what we was going to get into, we probably wouldn't have been quite so raring to go. But ignorance is bliss. That's about what it boiled down to.
You left England, and then you went over to France.
No, we went to England.
Right. And then from England you went over to France?
Yeah.
Tell me what it was like as you were approaching Omaha Beach.
So, that made you think there'd been a war going on. There's still people floating around in the harbor there. I don't think they'd fished all the bodies out of there yet. we swore that we saw guys floating. But ships everywhere. We went down the rope ladder alongside the ship down to, they had, I think some of us wound up just going on a flat barge into close to the shore. But we still probably waded maybe waist deep. By the time the barge, they were shallow draft, but it still could only get so close to the beach, and they would bottom. You just had to wait it the rest of the way. I remember I had a watch that was not waterproof. And also, I stepped aside when I got down to the end of the ramp, stepped aside to my platoon to go by, stepped backwards into a hole. Like I say, most of the water was about waist deep, but I stepped into a hole way over my head. And in the process, I had a duffel bag over this shoulder, and my weapon wound up. And I had to go after it. And about 2 days later, my watch wasn't working. I took it apart, and inside of it is just solid red rust. You couldn't even see the works of it. It was just solid red rust. That salt water really did the trick. And I bought that watch on furlough in March of that year when I was home. Well, that's one thing they did while we were at Butner, is like 30% of the outfit at the time was given furloughs home, 15 days. So that's where a lot of the time was spent. And during that time, I bought this watch. And I bought that watch, I think down around 13th and Douglas, from Ma Blumkin. That's where she originally started business down. She had a little old hawk shop. Well, her husband had the hawk shop. She sold anything that they could get to sell while she sold it. We bought our footlockers through her. But that's,
Tell me about what happened after you landed on France, and you landed on the beach. Then what happened? I mean, what
well,
did you do?
we just saddled up and that movie, The Longest Day, that last scene, that road up the hill, I swear that that was the same damn road that we went up. I mean, it looked so much like it, and then there was a blown out German pillbox beside it, and I remember going right by it. It was all going by it. They must have cooked a couple of crops in there. But we landed with wool uniform on and impregnated fatigues over that. Impregnated against mustard gas in July. And walking up that hill, carrying a duffel bag. He was sweating a little bit trying to get at the top. So we moved in about, maybe a mile. And that's where that Omaha Beach Cemetery is down too. It's also where I flew off of on my first airplane ride back across the channel when I was in the hospital plane. But anyhow, we moved up there and were told to remove the impregnated fatigues, put them in a pile, take the old gas mask, put it in the pile, and that was the good part of the day, was getting rid of that son of a gun. But they, after spending 14 million hours in gas mask drill stateside, to get it into the combat zone and throw the gas mask away. That was something else. Strictly typical GI procedure. But the story went that the English intelligence knew wherever drop of gas that the Germans owned, they knew where it was warehoused and had it watched all the time, and could give 24 hours advance notice of any gas being moved out of their gas warehouses. And so gas never was used, but gas to us at that time was like nuclear warfare is to present day army. That's the thing that you dread, is the thought of atomic warfare. And back in those days, well, the thing you dreaded was gas warfare. It carried over from World War I, of course.
When were you actually committed into battle?
See, this was the 5th of July, and we moved into an assembly area. We, I don't know, must have moved 5 miles inland, and actually we set up a camp of tents under cover of whatever cover we had above, what we called an assembly area. And see, on the 8th of July, the 2nd Battalion was taken up to the line and replaced a battalion out of the 30th Division in the line in a static defensive position. And that was the first commitment of any unit of the 134th or the 35th Division. But they just stayed there a couple of days and then they were pulled back. Then the 137th Regiment from Kansas and the 320th Regiment, which was the other 2 regiments in the 35th Division, they were committed between the 29th Division and the 30th Division. And by the way, that made 3 National Guard divisions in a line here. And the funny part of it was, in 1941, General Bradley, then a 2-star general, was given command of a National Guard division, and never was generally published, but he had terrible dislike for National Guard troops. He just, no respect for them at all. Of course, he was over regular Army, and there was a lot of prejudice. The regular Army hated the National Guard. I don't know why we didn't do them any harm, except we were all smarter and better soldiers than they were, in spite of the fact that we only did it 2 hours a week. But the regular Army was a little short of IQ. Most of the people in the regular Army peacetime in those days were people that would rather be in the Army than trying to make it on the outside. And the level of, that quality level wasn't very good in the regular Army. The officers were all West Point, as was, of course, Bradley, but they were so ingrained with regular Army that they didn't think the National Guard would mount to it. But the regular Army didn't mount to anything either. They weren't any better trained than we were. They didn't have any equipment to train with any more than we did. But they found out that the National Guard made a little bit of contribution. In fact, I think the National Guard contributed more officers. I think it's 66,000 officers out of the National Guard. Of course, what they did, of course, sending people to OCS out of National Guard units. Well, then, after they were trained at Benning, they could go to any unit, regular Army or whatever. It didn't make any difference. Once we was mobilized, well, we were all in the U.S. Army. It didn't make any difference whether you was regular Army or not. There was prejudice was there, but the actual assignments and so forth by one unit same as the other. But anyway, all three of those divisions distinguished themselves. 29th, of course, made the D-Day landing. The 30th Division came in soon after D-Day, and they fought tough. They had their share of casualties just like we did. They were Tennessee National Guard, and they were good. I think in the long run, most of the regular Army officers found out National Guard outfits every bit as good as regular Army. Not many of them admitted it, that's all. But we wound up, we were assigned in the Corps Reserve, 134th, 19th Corps. And the Corps consisted of the 29th, 30th Divisions, and the 35th. There might have been one other division involved. Okay?
Third Armor. Third Armor?
Probably, yeah. Although the Armor wasn't playing much of a role right then in Normandy. But anyway, this was on the 11th, the 320th and 137th were committed. And then the night of the 13th and the 14th is when the 3rd Battalion was moved up to relieve the 115th Regiment of the 29th Division. And then on the 15th is when we took off for Hill 122. Well, that was on base of the Hill 122 where we relieved them. So then that's when things got real rough. To begin with, the 1st and 2nd Battalions, the 3rd Battalion went in and took over the positions, 29th, that whole regiment. Of course, they were beat up, and like any infantry outfit, and made a couple of attacks. Well, you were short-handed. So we replaced their whole regiment with one battalion. And, 2 days later, the same thing happened to us. We were in the same shape. But the 3rd Battalion, on the 15th, the attack started. The 1st and the 2nd moved through us. And we remained in position until mid-afternoon, I think it was. And then we were pulled out, moved over to the right, and thinking that the 320th was up here when they were back here, found out we had an open flank and didn't know it. We tried to go up this road right here, in the column of ducks, file on each side of the road. That's when we got in trouble. But we pulled back that night, and then next morning we took off in an attack formation and moved up with the objective of pulling up alongside the 1st Battalion. And it took us 2 days to fight our way up there. Of course, we went over to the right flank, and that's when Company L got there.
What would be the longest day you think?
It's pretty factual.
Really?
Mhm. There's another book, this book here, I had.
Those aren't hedgerows,
many years.
those are mountains.
Yeah. Well,
I mean,
That, there's foliage growing out of there.
jeez.
They've trimmed that all down now.
Really?
Yeah,
Man.
but that hedgerow could be, it's like a fence, except it's about
It's a natural fence.
5 or 6 feet thick and maybe up to 10 feet high, some of them.
Man.
But also, on this picture here, after having that book for about 10 years, I was looking at it one day and found out, well, hell, that's me.
Is that you, actually?
Yeah,
You think so?
yeah, I know so,
Where?
right there.
Wow.
I remember when I took that picture, 'cause that morning, my platoon started out 42 men.
Uh-huh.
At noon, I had 6 men left. So we had to pull back and reorganize.
I would think so.
Do you know what day that picture was taken?
What day?
Yeah.
17th.
So that'd be a Monday?
I don't, I couldn't connect it.